Welcome to In This Body, a podcast where we dive deep into the potent power of embodiment. I'm your host, Ailey Jolie, a psychotherapist deeply passionate about living life fully from the wisdom within your very own body. The podcast In This Body is a love letter to embodiment, a podcast dedicated to asking important questions like, how does connecting to your body change your life? How does connecting to your body enhance your capacity to love more deeply and live more authentically? And how can collective embodiment alter the course of our shared world? Join me for consciously curated conversations with leading experts. Each episode is intended to support you in reconnecting to your very own body. This podcast will be available for free wherever you get your podcasts, making it easy for you to stay connected to In This Body, the podcast with me, Ailey Jolie. Welcome to In This Body. Today I'm honored to introduce Henika Patel. Henika is a teacher of embodiment, sensuality, and holistic healing, and the founder of the School of Sensual Arts. The School of Sensual Arts translates ancient wisdom for modern life and relationships, offering online and in-person events. Henika's journey to teaching is deeply rooted in her Indian heritage. Henika is a first-generation Indian woman born in England, guided by her father, an ex-monk turned artist. She grew up surrounded by ancient arts and spiritual practices that have profoundly shaped how she approaches supporting others today. Henika specializes in guiding individuals through the transformative power of Tantra, yoga, and body work, creating safe spaces for people to explore and reconnect with their very own bodies. Her approach uniquely blends Eastern traditions with Western therapeutic principles, allowing for a holistic and profoundly personalized experience of healing and self-discovery. In addition to facilitating workshops, retreats, and regular teachings, Henika is also the author of Sensual, Connect Deeply, Express Freely, Love Intimately, a book that invites readers to rediscover their sensual selves through a combination of ancient wisdoms and modern practice. Her book is a powerful resource for anyone looking to overcome blocks, embrace their sensuality, and live more fully by connecting to their body and sensuality. Her book is a powerful resource for anyone looking to overcome blocks and embrace their sensuality. Henika, I'm thrilled to have you here today as we explore the link between embodiment and sensuality. Welcome to In This Body, the podcast with me, Ailey Jolie. The first question I have for you today is a little bit of a big one, but it's one of my favorite questions, and I would love to hear from you. What does being in your body mean to you?
I love this question because I've felt in my life the polar opposite of being in my body. And so much of my journey has been about learning to be in my body again. So to me, being in my body is being able to recognize the moment-to-moment sensations that are happening and being able to use those sensations as what I call sacred messengers that can help to inform me about what my body needs and maybe what my body doesn't need as well. And yeah, just to really tap into those sensations, not just as things that come and go, but actually as intelligence. So that's something that I'm not going to say I have learned to do, because I think it's a continual journey as we go through the stages of life and, as our bodies change as well. So yeah, definitely a lifelong student to being in my body.
I love it. You have spent a lot of time being a student to get into your present role of teaching about embodiment and sensuality. And I would love to hear from you, because I have read about it in your book, about how the work you do today is really rooted in your heritage and your upbringing. If you could share a little bit about that piece of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned just now, I have had the experience of not being in my body. And the way that I came to that was that I realized within the relationship that I was in at that time that I was feeling numbness in the bedroom. And that was the first indication to me that it wasn't only in the bedroom, it was actually a numbness everywhere that I was experiencing in my body, in my emotions. And And through that, I went on Google, and as we mostly do, especially about subjects that I think are a little bit taboo. And I wrote how to heal a numb vagina, quite honestly. And what came up was kind of like Cosmo top 10 positions. And something in me knew that it wasn't about buying a new piece of underwear, and it wasn't about learning X, Y, and Z position, but actually there was something deeper going on. And that really led me back to my lineage. I had already trained in the yogic system. My father was a monk in the 80s, so I had a lot of that growing up. But what it really led me to was the system of Tantra. And in the system of Tantra, I grew up seeing a lot of like rituals in not what you might be thinking, listeners, but a lot of rituals devoted to the goddesses and divine feminine in the kind of origins of Tantra. And so this question that I typed into Google actually ended up being a research or me search that stemmed years and years to learn how to turn my body back online using the tools of Tantra, yoga, Ayurveda, these sister sciences that were always designed to be practiced with one another. And then I guess eventually to share those tools as sisters in a holistic way, to provide tools that apply both inside the bedroom, but also outside of it as well. So that's kind of how I came to do what I do.
What have you struggled with in regards to your holistic approach? Because you do a really beautiful job of integrating Eastern traditions with some Western, more therapeutic practices and understanding, as I know you spent time training as a psychotherapist and decided not to go there. Where have you struggled to create some of that holistic offering that you do bring to the people that you offer support to?
Yeah, I love this question because I feel like this is the bridge where my world and your world meet, and we have this beautiful kind of passing over, don't we, in both of our worlds and our work. And when I was doing a lot of my own journey and my own healing, and then the trainings that I was living in Beijing and India and Thailand at that time for several years. And I was finding that the sort of bottom-up approach to healing, so that means sort of using your body and then allowing that to catalyze the effects in the mind and the psyche. Those were amazing, very impactful, very, very cathartic. Definitely brought up a lot of material. And the problem for me was there was nowhere for that material to land. So some things were brought up maybe perhaps quicker than my mind was ready for. And so when I came back to the UK, that's really what set the seed for me going down the path of studying first art psychotherapy and then starting that course in couples psychotherapy and individual psychotherapy, because I wanted to join together not only the body-based practices, but ways to integrate those practices in a way that material can be processed. And so I really do believe that both do marry and they go hand in hand. And as much as we need talking therapies, we also need body-based practices. And as much as we have body-based practices, we also need spaces to process those practices as well. So so I think that's where my challenges have laid. And then when I was studying therapy and sort of being in the psychoanalytic world and feeling like I just want to stand up and walk around and also being denied that sort of actually confirmed to me that actually both of these systems have a place and a space to integrate together.
Yeah, as I have heard more about your experience training in the psychoanalytic tradition, I always felt a deep sadness that you didn't get that opportunity, or that really in the United Kingdom, where I've done very little training, it is trained out of practitioners and clinicians, that kind of body-based awareness. And I would love to hear from you how you held on to that, because I supervise therapists and I have a lot of them that go through these training programs, and they often come to me and it's just not been my lived experience. That's not where I got my education. The body was honored in most of my classes. How you kind of came out of some of that training and were able to maintain connected to your body, because I also know the story of how you left, and it sounds like a pretty body-based experience in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I had spent many, many years using the Eastern traditional systems to take off the masks that I was wearing. And, my previous life was as, in law and in that kind of government world. So I was wearing a lot of very thick masks that were disconnecting me to my body and my sensations and my desires. And so I think when I stepped back into an environment where I realized that that experience, I was putting back on the masks, or maybe I was feeling smaller or contracted rather than expansive, which is one of the key teachings in the tantric philosophy, that the world is operating on this system known as spanda. And spanda essentially means like the gentle pulsation of the universe. And as much as things expand and we can experience joy and all the amazing big things, sometimes the world contracts, and you can feel that in something as simple as your breath, in your inhale and your exhale, and in the beat of your heart contracting and expanding. And so for me, when I experienced a contraction, I was a lot more aware of it in my body because of the body-based practices, that it then became an embodied decision to say, okay, I don't think that this is for me right now. And to be able to leave that, still learning and taking with me a lot of the helpful tools that it requires to hold space, and with the transference and things that comes up when you do that, even with body-based practices. So yes, I think that's a distinguishing factor for how I was, able to decide not for me this time.
I so much respect and admiration for people who make that choice. I made a similar choice around medicine of going, no, I did all the things, but this is not for me at this point in my life. So I'm always curious to hear from people when they have that type of moment of, for you, it sounds like a very integrated moment of not for me this time. And I would love to hear a little bit more from you because you named it so subtly, the contraction and expansion, because I'm sure for some people that concept might seem quite unfamiliar or quite new. If you could speak to how that shows up in the subtle ways, maybe every single day. You gave the example of breath, but I'm assuming there's other ones as well.
Yeah, I mean, I find great comfort in this part of the philosophy because it reminds me that even in the day, we flow through different experiences, and things happen, some that we plan and some things happen that we don't plan. And our nervous system is constantly fluctuating and designed to fluctuate through the waves of the experiences that we have. And so day to day, let's say, for example, you enter an environment where you feel nervous, or you feel anxious, that would be an example of a contraction. And this philosophy is saying, as much as we hold contraction, there is also in the next heartbeat, in the next breath, a possibility for expansion. So it's not saying that it will happen immediately, but it gives hope, it gives prospect, it gives that subtlety in the way that Spanda is described as a natural pulsation or law of the universe in these practices, things that have been studied for thousands and thousands of years by yogis and tantrikas to transmute that to us. And I think that's a nice way of bringing it into the modern world, where in times for myself, for example, where I feel contracted, I can think, okay, well, if I'm feeling contraction now, expansion is around the corner. Like, this is something that I can grow in. This is something that I can expand in. And so it's a little more easy to manage, I find.
One thing that you do really well in your book is what you just did, is like the naming of just the really subtle philosophy of Tantra and how it can show up in our everyday life. And I would love to hear from you a little bit about your book. I've read it and I have some questions that I will ask you about it. But for the reader who hasn't maybe heard of your book, Sensual, can you share a little bit about what it's about?
Yeah, absolutely. So sensual is an invitation to connect deeply, to express freely, and to love intimately. And it's composed of 3 segments. The first part is your natural sensuality. So I break down the 3 sister sciences of Tantra, Yoga, Ayurveda, and bring them back into an argument that we are all born with a natural sensuality, which then goes on into the second part to think about the things in our life that have sealed or concealed that sensuality, things like our fears, our shame, which is often one of the first things that comes up when we start to talk about the subject of sensuality, stress and how that impacts the body's response to being a sensate being, and our trauma as well, and thinking about some of the Eastern approaches to trauma as a multi-layered approach that that we use and that we think about when we're doing the practices as well. And then the third part is sort of the sensual awakening, you could say. So how can we use our sensuality not only in the bedroom, though there is a chapter dedicated to that, but also outside of the bedroom as well? How does it tap into our creative sense? How does it tap into our relationships? How does it tap into bringing things from the unmanifest into the manifest, which is, again, is another central philosophy to the tantric system. So yeah, it's designed that way to take readers on a journey to tap back into their natural sensuality, think about what might be covering some of that along their journey, and then think about where else they might want to use it. And there's mythology weaved into there, there's practices weaved into that, there's theory and stories from myself and the clients that have so courageously walked through the School of Sensual Arts and embarked on some of these beautiful practices that we have. So yeah, that's sensual.
What led you to write this book? I have 2 questions. I'm going to start with that one.
Yeah, what led me to write the book? So it was a kind of reverse engineered thing that happened where at the very early stages of my journey, where I was finding it quite difficult to have conversations around numb vaginas and depression and these practices, with a very small community in a new city that I had moved to. So I started, this is sort of before the rise of Instagram and things like that, writing a blog about the practices that I was finding, human connection. And those were really the seeds, I guess, through which the book formed. And it wasn't through many, many years later that I was then approached later by my publisher, Hay House, to pick up on the subject and write a book about it. And so it was a reverse process in that I then had to think, well, what am I going to write the book about? But it became very obvious because the school is called the School of Sensual Arts, and it's really the seed of where my own journey began, moving from numbness into sensuality, and hoping to share the tools and provide spaces where we can have the kind of conversations that really help to lift shame, and yeah, make it more a part of our everyday life.
My next question, and maybe it's a little biased by my own lived experience right now as I'm writing a book. What did it take for you to write this book? Because as I was reading Sensual, I felt like I was like taken on your journey, and it was very detailed. And I'm curious what it took for you to actually write with that level of openness and intimacy, and also philosophy and education. Like, it was really well formed. I would love to hear a little bit about your writing journey.
Yeah, oh, I love this, and just kind of channeling this, knowing that you are in your writing journey as well, and super, super excited. I love to read your words and your Substacks. I'm so excited for your book to come. I think, for me, it was a really, when I reflect back on it now, I'm going to say 2 things about this. The first thing is that I think it's possibly like childbirth, where it's a really, for me, was a painful process that now that the book is birthed, I can't quite put my finger on just how painful it was because of the oxytocin now that it's out in the world. And I say painful not because it's my sad life story in there, but because I feel that I wrote the book in three times essentially. And the first time that I wrote the book was essentially for myself. It was for me to remember why I came to these practices, to go back to the space of numbness, and to sit with that version of myself with the deep desire that if the book lands in even one person's hands who is not feeling anything in their body or in their relationship, what words would they need to hear? And what words did I need to hear at that time? And so the first version of that book was really like rolling up the sleeves and trudging through that stuff that I had put away, I think. The second round of the book was drawing together the philosophy, the mythology, the research, trips to India, sitting with teachers and ashrams and practices that I'd learned over the years. And then it started to read a bit like a textbook, and I didn't want that either. So then the third round of the book was drawing together, you could say, the heart and the story of my journey and the journey of different people who had run through the school, with the philosophy and the mythology and the theory, to then create, I guess, the third version, which is the version that exists now. So it was definitely a few steps that required different parts of me. Like the first version required my heart and body completely. And I did go into a writing cave for about 2 years. And the next part was really in my head, it was research based and all of that. And then the third was sort of bringing together the heart and the mind into what it is now. Mm.
I would love to hear. It is in the book, and you've named a little bit about it, but your process of rediscovering your sensuality, because I feel like your lived example from going from Googling numb vagina to where you are now is quite inspiring and unique. And yeah, if you could just take the listener into a few moments of what that journey has included for you.
Yeah, I think one of the key moments that is coming up for me right now was sitting in a circle, um, which I had started going to at that time. And I was probably in my third or fourth circle of a monthly check-in. And I realized in that moment that numbness is also a sensation. And that was, I would say, a pivotal point in my journey, to be able to name that as a sensation and then be able to think about, okay, well, why is this here? And then to kind of excavate that as a reverse process, and start to work more deeply with the things that numbness was protecting or blocking in terms of memories or experiences. So that I think is a key moment, being able to name that. And then through various, I suppose, different trainings and modalities that I've experienced along the way, another memory that comes to mind is an experience of sound. And I had no idea really how impactful sound vibration is in getting into the body. I see it in a kind of metaphorical way where it's like this really fine thread that can go through or pierce through some parts of the physical anatomy, the tissues, the energetic body that sometimes we can't get to otherwise. And so I've had two very cathartic experiences with sound. One felt like, and by sound, I mean sound bowls and sound healing, Tibetan sound bowls, Himalayan sound bowls, this kind of thing. One was in a sound bath where I was receiving, and after that, I felt sort of an emotional purge, and I can only describe it as, when you cry and there's like no tears coming out and also no sound, but it's like this. It was a deep purge from my stomach that was being released, and it set me off balance for a few days before then, it came back into balance in my body, in my experience. And the second one was where the bowls are actually being played on my body, so sound vibration directly within the body at different healing frequencies. And that created waves of wow, sensation that I had never experienced before. And those waves of sensation I now know and name as Shakti. Shakti being the natural power or waves of intelligence that reside within our body that I had never experienced before. And yeah, I think those are two really pivotal moments, yeah, in the journey that I've had.
Both of them open up so much in my mind because in working with clients and in my own experience in my body, um, the statement of I don't know or I don't feel anything can be very challenging for clients or my younger self. And I do also have a similar memory of the moment when my therapist asked me, like, who is saying they don't know? Like, what is the voice behind that? Similar to the numbness, we can just really get stuck there and be like, well, we're not having an experience, but there is an experience and not having an experience. I would love to hear how you maybe guide people through that process of maybe they are completely in a state of numbness or disconnection is all they know, or they've never experienced Shakti. How do you use your work and everything that you offer to invite people to be more curious and to find out more of what's going on for them?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question because it comes back to seeing the body as this multi-layered being.
Mm.
And in this philosophy, that's called the koshas, in the yogic and tantric philosophy, the koshas. So at the School of Sensual Arts, we have different experiences, from community-based experiences to one-to-one experiences that you can take that will help you to travel through the different layers of the body. The different layers of the body being first the physical, and that's made up of literally your bones and your tissues and your food, the Annamaya kosha. The next being the energetic, so the pranamaya kosha, and the energetic body being the one that carries the flow of your emotions and your sensations. And we go there with things like the breath, and being able to, in between the postures in Tantra yoga, there's a key distinction that I find in that there are pauses in which you can start to meditate on where those postures have affected you energetically. So if you've stood in tree pose for 2 minutes, and you put your leg down before moving into the next posture, where do you feel the energy, the prana of that posture? And that, in its subtle way, helps us to train ourselves to connect to the emotions within the body as and when they impact us. So then that leads us to the manomaya kosha. So that's the mind layer. So that's when we start to think about what are the thoughts that are coming up when I'm experiencing this thing, or when I'm relating back to something that's happened in the past. What are the imprints of that experience that arise? So that's the mind layer. And then when we work with those three layers, the mind, the energy or the emotion, and the physical, that leads us to that point that you just mentioned. Who is experiencing the thoughts? Who is experiencing the energy or the emotion? Who is experiencing the physical body? Which leads us to the fourth layer. And that fourth layer is the witnessing self. And so the transition of the work is supporting individuals in stepping into the witnessing self, and realizing I am a body, I am an energy, I am a mind that is experiencing these things, but I am not these things. And that leads us to the innermost layer, which in this philosophy is the Anandamaya, which is the bliss body. That at our core, at our center, we are bliss, and that is a kind of bliss that is not transient bliss or pleasure that comes and goes, but a state that is solid, and everlasting, and perpetual, regardless of the fluctuating circumstances of all of the other layers. So yeah, so taking in the experiences that we create, an approach where we can tap into those different parts of the body, to unravel.
As you're speaking, I was really appreciating how integrated your knowledge in the philosophical realm is. Like, it's so embodied as I'm hearing you speak. I'm like, yeah, she really knows what she's talking about. Like, I know all these terms, I've read them, but I'm like,
Yeah.
your ability to articulate them in such a way where it's so easy to follow is something I really just was like, this is really juicy, which leads me to, I would love to hear more about, and this is what it leads me to, is asking you about your school, what you have created. Could you share what exactly you offer at the School of Sensual Arts?
Yeah, sure. So the School of Sensual Arts was really born as this way of getting a group together that didn't exist before on my own journey to uncover the subject of sensuality. So I apply the subjects of yoga, tantra, Ayurveda with an understanding of psychotherapy and some of the modalities in the West in a way that applies to the subject of sensuality. So really with this zoomed in lens on that particular subject. And at the School of Sensual Arts, one of the key parts of the school is the community that we have. Knowing that one of the key things that we run into when we first embark on the journey of sensuality is oftentimes our shame. And our shame usually derives as a feeling of potentially being castrated from community. That's why shame comes up in our body, because we feel in our nervous system, I might be left out of the tribe if I was to experience this pleasure or wear that dress or whatever it is, experience this type of sexuality. So in the same way that we experience shame in and because of community and our participation in it, the same way that we can heal that shame is being part of community that provides us space of love and acceptance. And so the online Tantra yoga community, where we practice twice a week in an embodied way, exploring a different philosophical theme every week and an overarching philosophical theme every 3 months, is the heart. We also have our in-person experiences, which are sometimes Tantra yoga and are sometimes our Shakti circles, as I know you've experienced as well, which operate in London. And then we also have our retreats that run abroad as well. And because of the lockdown days, we have quite a lot of online courses and content that is available. For example, the Sensual Education series, which is a bundle of questions that I received around sensuality that I've pretty much put into this 5-part masterclass that moves from understanding the different pleasure pathways in the body. That goes into Yoni Shakti, so understanding, it's called Yoni Shakti Pussy Power because it's a kind of translation of, again, drawing together the philosophy and the practices, self-care and self-pleasure rituals to awaken sensation. And we also have experiences for couples as well, so online tantric date nights that are based in the ancient texts, and invite couples to experience in a practical way some of the tools for connection from the comfort of home. So we have a lot on the website, schoolofsensualarts.co.uk, and a lot happening here, in London and in our retreats every year as well.
How has stepping into the role of teacher maybe changed your understanding of sensuality, or just changed you and the relationship you have with your body?
It's a great question. I think before teaching on this subject, of course, it was only my own experience that I was experiencing. And when I stepped into the world of sharing the tools that I had found, and providing sessions one-to-one or in groups, I started to come into contact with the different experiences of people and how they experience their sensuality or their shame. And I think that really broadened the knowledge that I have of the many, many reasons why sensuality may feel blocked within the body. And also just humbled me a lot, humbled me in the way that working with human beings and understanding and hearing the stories that lead us to where we are and where we want to be, I think is possibly one of my favorite things about the teaching experience, or just working with people. And yeah, it gives me great hope that more and more of us are opening into this subject. I feel like it's something that's really taken flight over the past few years, not only with women, couples, but all genders and sexualities, thinking about sensuality, not just sexuality, but actually slowing things down and having experiences that feel satiating, in a way that is, yeah, just embodied. And maybe we don't want to experience things the way that we saw them in porn growing up. Maybe we want to learn about more tools that can help us, to be in our body when we are in our sensual experiences.
As you have worked with people, what are the common blocks or barriers that you've noticed that stop people from experiencing more of their own sexuality or sensuality in general? And my second question, or being in their body, and you can speak to either or both or just one.
Yeah, I think there's so much education for the mind. Most of our education years, apart from 1 hour of physical education a week or something, is about training our minds and learning with our memory and calculations and all of that stuff, learning about the outside world and how it operates and how we can operate within that outside world. And there's not as much information, or we have to learn it by ourselves usually, about the knowledge on the inside world and how to operate that landscape. And that is stuff that we often learn by mistakes often, or things happen in our lives, that then force us to look inside because there's no other place that we can be. And so, I think some of the common things that that actually informed that second part of the book, are things like shame, are things like fear. Sometimes this fear of, if I was to be sensual or experience sensuality, what would people think? And then that also has its roots in shame as well, often. There's stress as well, and thinking of the body as this organism that has priorities, right? So if the priority at that time is survival, because we've experienced something that has sent our nervous system into a mode of protection, then naturally, through our evolved system, procreation is not going to be on the front of the hub, like it's going to be on the back burner, right? So how do we then kind of work on de-accelerating the nervous system so we can bring that process slightly further forwards? So sometimes it's not as simple as learning tools for sensuality. Sometimes it's actually going into the stuff that is accelerating our nervous system so much that we can't do that right now. Those two systems cannot coexist. And sometimes in popular culture, you sometimes hear that phrase of like, pleasure cannot coexist in the same pathway as like stress or pain or trauma and things like that. So it's like, how do we provide a space? How do we provide a body that can experience both in a regulated way? So yeah, so there's those things, and then our traumatic experiences that then obviously correlate to our stress and the way that that's processing in the body. So I'd say those are the four sort of key areas that I come into contact with sensuality and with getting into the body. Yeah.
What practices do you recommend for people to connect to their body or their sensuality? Again, you can speak to both or just one.
Yeah, I one of my favorite practices, and it's in the first chapter of the book for this reason, is, there's the very, very popular and well-known gratitude practice. So this is sort of my sensual version of that. So it's based on the premise that we know that the more gratitude we feel, the more great things happen to us, in terms of we start to recognize and look out for those great things that happen in the day. And that has an impact on our oxytocin levels, and that practice in itself is, I'm sure, scientifically proven now. So this practice is the same, but it's thinking about the five senses. So it's thinking about what is something I saw today that is beautiful or that has marked my mind? Is there a particular sound that I've heard today that is drawing me back into my body? Is there a particular smell that I can recall? Is there a particular taste? Is there something that I felt in my emotional body? And kind of touching on all of those five senses, whether it's at the end of the day or in an intimate reaction, really, really can help us to move from, again, being in that kind of outside sphere to being inside the body again. And it's something that I love because you can do it in your journal, but you can also do it in an experience that is taking you outside of your body to come back in quite quickly. And smell in particular is a very, very grounding sense. It's correlated in Tantra to the root of our body. So smell is not only sensual, but it's also a great tool for evoking safety and bringing us from literally the top of our heads and the spinning thoughts back down into the base of the body. So that can be a good one to, just to bring us back into the here and now.
What other practices do you often find yourself recommending for people who maybe are completely new to a pleasure practice or the realm of Tantra or sensuality? Where do you often start with people?
I would say to find things that help you to get back into your body that may be things that you enjoy doing. So maybe you enjoy nature, so that might be going out for walks. Maybe you enjoy swimming, so that might be doing that more. Things that you naturally do that you enjoy to help you get back into your body, and then becoming mindful of how those things feel and impact you. I think before I would say, like, come and join Tantra yoga, but that might not, that might not be for everyone, depending on where they are in their journey. The Tantra yoga system is a beautiful system because if you've experienced Hatha yoga, it's similar, very, very similar to Hatha yoga. But it has a lot more focus and awareness in the energetic body as well. So I mentioned those small pauses in between, sort of slower, you could say, in terms of, just providing space for tapping into the energy body, and weaving it as we do at the School of Sensual Arts with the mythology, with the goddesses, which are all archetypes, personalities that we can explore within ourselves. And so that's a sort of another spin-off, I could say. But if you're curious about Tantra yoga, you're welcome to welcome to come and trial with us. We have trials through the year, so yeah.
What are some misconceptions about Tantra or Tantra yoga that you find yourself actively or commonly engaging with?
Yeah, so I think sometimes more of my work is dispelling what Tantra isn't, as well as, sharing what it is. But I think there is a popular culture thing of, Tantra equals sex. And I can share a little bit about why that is. There are many, many different schools of Tantra, 64 different schools of Tantra. And within those schools, there is the right hand side and the left-hand side. And within the left-hand side, there is one school which uses something called the 5 M's. And the 5 M's are 5 substances that are usually in like traditional Eastern spiritual practices, you could say they're substances which are said to cause fluctuations within the mind and the body. So someone who is a practitioner wouldn't usually take these substances, but within this particular school, the teacher would give the practitioner or the student these 5 substances at different parts along their journey for them to overcome any sort of pulls or fluctuations or addictions that may lie in these substances. And those substances are things that we have all around us today in the Western world. They're things like alcohol and meat. They're things like fish. And also one of those 5 M's is sex. So within one of these 64 schools, one of the practices said, sex can be used as a tool for meditation to teach us to overcome our fluctuations that are created in the mind when sexual energy is flowing through the body, for us to learn how we can become the master of our sexual energy rather than it being the master of us. And that's the kind of thing that has been sort of cherry picked, you could say, and sensationalized and commercialized as what we now know as neo-tantra in the West predominantly. But also, I'm not going to only say it's misunderstood in the West, because also in India, Tantra is seen as black magic, because a lot of the practices, I said, it's very based in energy. A lot of the practices are misunderstood for being kind of witchcraft, and it has this kind of connotation. So I'd say across the board, it's pretty misunderstood. And a lot of my work therein lies in helping to bring Tantra into the tools that it can be, as well as the sexual experiences and the tools for connection. And again, I've had shifts in my own journey through naming what Tantra is and isn't, to more understanding Tantra as it translates from Sanskrit as a technology. And where society experiences repression most is where that technology will become active. So if in today's world and society, sexuality is where we're experiencing repression, then that's where the technology of Tantra will find its way to express itself. And maybe in another 500 years, there'll be something else that's repressed and it will work its way into another form. So yeah, I think that's how it's often misunderstood. And that's now what I do to dispel some of it.
Those misunderstandings, I'm imagining, and I don't have to overly imagine too much. I can just think of clients, how they block the experience of getting into the body or being present or connecting to sensuality because there's a story of like what it should be or what I'm feeling means XYZ. Could you speak to a little bit of how you actually address the misconception when someone doesn't even know they're holding it, but as a teacher, you are aware, like their perspective of Tantra just equaling sex is stopping them from experiencing pleasure or is keeping them stuck in this narrative of numbness? Because I know that that is a very common experience and I know that you're very skilled. So I would love to hear how you address that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that sometimes our responses to experiences that we have had can sometimes be numbness, but it can also be in the opposite. It can also be in hypersexualization. And so that is another expression that can come to be. And hypersexualization doesn't necessarily mean that you're great at sensuality. It means that there is a natural defense that has come up in order to protect from some of the experience, emotions, memories, or has been created as a way of maneuvering sexual relationships in a way that is now in control. So you get to experience control within the sexual relationship. So it's about navigating within that, not breaking down defenses, because defenses are our natural way of navigating the world, but in us becoming aware of when are they arising, in which situations, in which dynamics and relationships do I see this arising? What options do I have at that time to still feel safe if I wasn't to do that? If I was to feel or to lean into this, or if I wasn't to engage sexually on this time, but emotionally, how would that feel? Do I have the scaffolding within my nervous system and my psyche to experience that? And so, yeah, so I think it's providing experiences. So, for example, in circles that I hold, providing experiences to practice speaking about some of these subjects, one-to-one, going back into experiences that may have led us to develop some of our responses to sexuality and sensuality, and thinking about how and why those might be there. Yeah, so I think that's the way that I would work.
Love when people reference what I've been trained to call hypersexuality. So the defense mechanism of I'm going to even cultivate even more sexual energy as a protective mechanism or be the one in control. because it resonates with some of my experience when I was in my early 20s. And then
Mhm.
for me, it really flipped quite sharply. It went the other way.
Mm.
And I love when people speak to it because it's often underspoken to. And I have a lot of clients that are in that position or that is their experience. And it's really hard for them to identify or reconcile, hey, this might be a protective response because it looks so much like capitalist versions of sexuality or even consumer-based versions of Tantra and Tantra yoga. And I would love to hear from you a little bit if you have anything to share of how people can start to identify if hypersexuality is how they are protecting themselves,
Mm.
um, and is maybe present in their experience.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think with hypersexuality, if we're recognizing that it is becoming a tool that we go to the same way somebody else might use a tool of alcohol or a tool of drugs when things feel difficult or when things feel vulnerable inside, or we might not be able to sit with a particular emotion. What is the response to that? Is it like, okay, let me get on Tinder because I know this is going to make me feel better. I'm going to get that validation. I know how to operate this particular relationship if it goes sexually, and then I'll be in control again. So it's sort of seeing those in between points. So what is between, in the yoga world, we're like, what is in between the thoughts? So what is in between the experiences of sexuality and sexualization? What are the thoughts? What are the experiences? What are the feelings that reside there that catalyze the process? And they're so subtle, aren't they? They're so subtle because we're running on the program that we're operating on. So we have to go into the kind of motherboard to start to see and to recognize when that might be happening.
Beautiful answer with some tidbits for people if they resonated with a little bit of hypersexuality.
Mm.
Before we close today, I wanted to ask you, for anyone who's new to the realm of sensuality or embodiment or tantra, if there's a first step that you would recommend.
A first step that I would recommend if you're new to Tantra or sensuality would be to read my book.
I love it. She's so honest.
And I'm going to say that because when I was first writing the book, it was, how do you write a book about being in the body? How do you put that into words? And I often used to say, the best book you can read is your body. But for someone who has never been in their body before, that's really difficult to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm finding now the book is a way to become more familiar and more, you could say, safe with some of the principles and the practices that you may encounter in the journey of Tantra. And then you can book into a class, or you can find a teacher, or you can try some of the practices that are there. That 5 gratitude of the senses is a really, really nice one. And try to make sensuality not just something that is in the bedroom and related to that, but something that is in the sip of your morning coffee. And see how that cultivates a practice that flowers into the rest of your life in the bedroom and outside of it as well.
And if we go back to the start of our time together today, is there anything that you would add to your definition of being in the body after we've done some exploring together?
Ooh, anything more to being in the body? I think sometimes it's perhaps surrendering the work and the activity of the mind and allowing the body, the less trained and educated body, by academic means, to have its space and to really value it as something that is not only intelligent within this lifetime, but something that has grown intelligent through thousands of years to exist in the way that it does, and to trust that there is a system there operating without our mind that is perhaps even more powerful than our mind sometimes lets it be. So I think I would add that.
Thank you for adding in the intergenerational lineage or honoring. It's something I'm so passionate about, and how I conceptualize embodiment and being in my body is honoring the people before me that allowed me to be in this body and the wisdom that's within it. And also, thank you for your time. It was such a delight to get to spend time with you, hear you in your element, and how gracefully you just sprinkle in what you know. It's so natural. Your teachings and your wisdom. Is there anything that you want people to know before we close? All of your information will be below. People can find you in the show notes. I know you have online offerings, in-person offerings, and retreats, but have I missed anything?
Yeah, you've got it all there. I'd love to connect with you. If you enjoyed this episode, let Ailey know, let me know. Share a post of it. I love to see which parts land for different people. And yeah, have a beautiful day, and get Ailey's book when it's out too.
Thank you. If you found value in this episode, it would mean so much to me for you to share the podcast with friends, a loved one, or on your social platforms. If you have the time, please rate and review the podcast so that this podcast reaches a larger audience and can inspire more and more humans to connect to their bodies too. Thank you for being here and nurturing the relationship you have with your very own